Now, maybe you saw this phenomenon if you were on social media this past week. It's kind of incredible the way it blew up. But with the Face app, how many of you here have the Face app on your phone? How many of you? Come on, that is not true. I know there are people in here who have done the Face app. How many of you deleted it already? Because the Russians are getting all your information. Yes, they're after you, and they're going to get all your money in your bank. You're going to wake up one day and there's going to be no money in your bank account. And you're like, so what's different? There's no money there anyway. No. So this Face app, though, it's essentially this app where you run a picture through a filter, and it can make you younger, older, and there's a variety of different filters that you can go on, and they just adjust your picture that you run through it. And so we decided to have a little fun with that, and some of the staff sent me some pictures, and so I just want to share with you some of the filters that they have. Maybe you're not aware of some of these filters, but they exist. They exist. For example, like what does a student pastor look like after he's been at camp for a week? There you go, with students. It really wears on you. That's Juan. There, in case you didn't know that. Man, it really takes its toll. And this is what you look like after you've watched all the staff kids. Man, just run that right through there, and they take their toll on you. No, it wears you out, those kids. And this is Brandon. And Brandon, we ran him through, we kind of went this, it was sort of this Easy Rider. You remember that movie? Yeah, we ran him through the Easy Rider filter. Bam, right there. And then we ran him through the Beatles filter, and it was the same thing. I mean, he just ended up with that guy. Amazing. And then Tom, who was with our students, he's transitioning over to adults. This is what you look like after he's getting ready to have his second kid this next week. And it just like, boom, second kid, it hits you hard. No longer 2-on-1. All right, it's 2-on-2. And then this is what you look like right here. This is me, if you can't tell. So, yes. That hair is something else, isn't it? And so I ran that through the filter of what does it look like after you have your fifth kid? After you have that fifth kid. So my wife, in case you didn't know, she's pregnant. Fifth kid? Yeah. I'm kidding. No, she's going to kill me. This will be the last time you ever see me again. No more kids. We're done at 4. 4 is it. Well, we tapped out at 4. And then we ran Gene through all the filters. We just ran him through every filter we could find. Gene Barron, the old lead pastor here at Valley View, still with us part-time for those of you that are new, doing a lot of different things. But we ran Gene through the filter, and he just doesn't change. Same yesterday, today, forever. Gene's just always the same. What this app does, though, is in a moment's time, it ages you. In a few seconds, you age a few decades. We know physically that isn't how it works. Physically, it takes years for us to grow, to mature. But there are conditions that people can have that which stunt growth or even stop it, for that matter. Chromosome abnormalities, skeletal abnormalities, malnutrition, genetic conditions, all of those things can stop someone's physical growth or physical maturity. In a spiritual way, similar things can happen. And we've been in this sermon series, Heroes of Faith, with the purpose of helping us to grow spiritually, to help us to grow in our faith. And so we've been looking at these heroes of faith that Hebrews chapter 11 mentions, goes all the way back. We go back into the Old Testament to study their story, to find why they are mentioned in Hebrews 11, connecting the Old Testament, New Testament in doing that. But as we've looked at these people, we've learned principles about how it is that we can grow our faith. And in a similar way, our faith grows, but it doesn't grow immediately. It doesn't grow overnight. You can't run yourself through an app and become mature. You can't download some type of filter and all of a sudden become Billy Graham or Mother Teresa. It just doesn't work like that. It takes time. It takes effort. That's what we've been talking about. But today we're going to take a little bit different perspective, and we're going to look at some of those abnormalities. In fact, we're going to focus on one thing that can stunt our spiritual growth, stops our spiritual growth. And it's us succumbing to temptations that enter into our lives. Today, as we look at Samson, we're going to look at a man who had a lot going for him, but he was also a man that struggled mightily with temptation. Now, I don't know if you've heard many sermons on temptation, don't know if you've studied much with temptation, but I do know this: we all deal with temptation. Now, aren't all tempted by the same things. And there are some things that you're never going to be tempted by. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but there's just things in life that will never tempt you. For example, you're never going to be tempted to exercise. It's not a thing. I promise you. You're not tempted to save money. You're tempted to spend money. You're not tempted to not say what you're thinking. No, you're tempted to always say what you're thinking. That's the temptation. You're not tempted to wake up early. Who gets tempted to wake up early? Oh, my goodness. But it feels good when you sleep in, right? That's the temptation. You're not tempted to eat cauliflower. Who's that? And when that shows up on your plate, there is no temptation to eat that. That is sheer discipline to put that into your mouth. We're tempted to eat ice cream, cookies, donuts, emphasize like multiple donuts, because the first donut's just a given. You just do that. The second and third donuts, that's when temptation, because there's got to be some fight there. Eventually, you're just not going to end up in a good spot. Temptation's tough. Here's how I would define temptation biblically for us, though. It's a desire. I want to emphasize that. Desire. It's not an action. Desire. And you maybe got a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a husband, a wife, a child. And maybe you've gotten upset at them because they are tempted or because they've admitted to being tempted to do certain things. You don't condemn someone for temptation. You help them through temptation. Now, once they succumb to an action, there's often consequences that come as a result of that. But I've talked to many men who will talk with their wives, and the wives just don't understand why they struggle with certain temptations. Jesus Christ was tempted, okay? Everyone goes through temptation, but it's a desire. And we need each other, as we'll talk about, to help us through those temptations. It's a desire to do something that you will enjoy initially. You'll enjoy gossiping. You're going to love it. Tear that person down. Tear that person apart. You'll enjoy spending all the money. You'll enjoy overeating. You'll enjoy oversleeping. We enjoy those things. But often, we can regret them eventually. More often than not, we regret it eventually. At some point, those things catch up to us. Temptation, it's a desire to do something that you will enjoy initially, no doubt about it, but you will regret it eventually. You'll regret giving into the addiction. And maybe you've been doing good. It's been days or weeks or months or even years since you've given into that thing. At some point, though, if you give into it, you'll enjoy it initially, but you'll regret it eventually. To give up on a spouse, I've had many conversations with people who wish that they could just go back and make that first marriage work because the second and third ones don't get any easier. To tear someone down behind their back, it feels good for a little bit, but eventually the ripple effects of that, they don't come out overnight, but they get back to you weeks, months later. It always gets back when it comes to that. Tear someone apart to their face. It's interesting there's a reason why one of the fruit of the Spirit is kindness. Like our approach to people really matters. Now we may be tempted to be harder or harsher, but that doesn't ever work out. Not in the end. And so temptation is a great struggle for us all. But what is the lesson that we learned from Samson? If there was one lesson that we could learn from Samson about temptation, it's this, is that you cannot control let me tell you a little bit about Samson, and we'll get to that point. Samson, here's the deal with him. He was bold before men, but he was weak before women. He fought the Lord's battles by day, but he broke the Lord's commandments by night. His spirit was strong, but his flesh was weak. That's who Samson was. And the lesson that we learn about Samson in regards to temptation is this, is that you can't control if you will be tempted, only how much you will be tempted. And you can control that. And in Samson's life, we see that he put himself in some bad positions around some bad people, and he didn't discipline himself enough to keep himself out of the positions of doing things that he would ultimately one day regret. His story picks up in Judges chapter 13. A certain man of Zorah named Manoah from the clan of the Danites had a wife who was childless, unable to give him birth. The angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, "You are barren and childless, but you are going to become pregnant and give birth to a son." There's only 4 instances in the Bible in which an angel appears to someone and prophesies or predicts a child will be born. It happened with Abraham and Isaac. It happened with John the Baptist and his mother Elizabeth. An angel appeared to Mary and Joseph and told them that Jesus would be born. And an angel appears to Manoah and his wife, telling them that Samson would be born. This tells you the significance that Samson has in God's plan. Very significant, incredibly significant. The story goes on. Now see to it that you drink no wine or other fermented drink, and that you do not eat anything unclean. You will become pregnant and have a son whose head is never to be touched by a razor, because the boy is to be a Nazirite, and it's in reference to a Nazirite vow, dedicated to God from the womb. He will take the lead in delivering Israel from the hands of the Philistines. What is the Nazirite vow? It's that Samson couldn't drink alcohol, he can't touch a living creature that has died, and he can't cut his hair. That was the Nazirite vow. And so in Samson's life, as he grew older, the woman gave birth to a boy, named him Samson. He grew, and the Lord blessed him, and the Spirit of the Lord began to stir in him. At this point in Samson's life, it's thought that he's about 20 years old. And life is good. He's successful, he's healthy, he's well-liked. His strength is undoubtedly becoming known. If you aren't familiar with Samson's story, he was incredibly strong. Like no one is like him. No one has ever been like him, the strength that he would display. It was something that was absolutely supernatural, the strength that was given to him from God. And so he's in a good place in life. And that's when temptation comes. That's when temptation came to Samson. You want to know how you know if this sermon's for you today? If you're sitting there and you're saying, I hope my husband's listening. I hope my wife's hearing this. I hope that friend of mine checks out this sermon. I hope they read Samson. My child needs to know this. Because it's in that comfortable spot that temptation comes to us. It's when we're thinking that we're okay, but somebody else needs it, that we have the most potential to end up succumbing to the temptation that's going to stunt our faith. It's going to hold us back. It's truthfully for all of us, no doubt about it. But you especially need to be careful if you're thinking like this is really for somebody else, because it's probably going to need to be for you. And in Samson's case, he had some real struggles. And so this is what happened to him after that, because it's really downhill for Samson from here on out until the very end of his life. Samson went down. And down is not just a geographical location that he is going to go to Timnah. It's also a spiritual destination that he is en route to. Timnah was a place where unbelieving Philistines lived. They were the kind of people that were wicked, unrepentant, and they were not trying to align themselves with the God of the Bible. And that's where he goes. He's going there to find a woman. And saw there a young Philistine woman. And when he returned, he said to his father and mother, I've seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife. You see, in this day, it was imperative that parents would go into agreements with one another before their children could be given over into marriage. That's just the way they did it. And so that's what Samson's talking about here. So there's a level of submission that we have to catch that Samson still has to his parents. His father and mother replied, Isn't there an acceptable woman, though, among your relatives or among all your people? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistine to get a wife? But Samson said to his father, Get her for me. She's the right one for me. And Samson just begins to have this struggle. He shouldn't have had this struggle, but the reason that he's having this struggle is because he's gone to some place that he shouldn't have gone, and he's been around people he shouldn't have been around. And the lesson here with Samson, we'll go on here in this next little verse, is he went down again. Down, down, down. And he talked with the woman, and he liked her. He shouldn't have liked her. He shouldn't have been around her. But because he put himself in the wrong location, this is what's happened to him. And the lesson that we learn from Samson here is going to be location, 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 location when it comes to temptation. Here's the question that you have to ask yourself. These are questions that will help you to minimize temptation in your life. I'm going to give you 3 questions that we learned from Samson. The first is this. What locations are you most tempted in? Because there's just locations that we can get in that bad things happen. You can put yourself in a spot, and because you put yourself in that spot, you're going to have to deal with something that otherwise you wouldn't have had to deal with. That if you have a drinking problem, it's probably not a good idea to be in a bar. If you have a gambling problem, it's probably not a good idea to be in a casino. If you don't want to gossip, you probably shouldn't be around people that are gossip. You just don't want to put yourself in that kind of a location. I was looking on the internet, and I came across a few pictures of just people that found themselves in bad locations. And when you get yourself in the wrong kind of location, bad things happen. I had a basketball coach in college. He said, nothing good, because he was always dealing with problems with the players. He said, nothing good will ever happen to you after midnight. It just doesn't happen. He said, nobody ever said that the best thing ever happened to them at 2 a.m. in the morning. He's like, it's just not a thing. It just doesn't take place. And he said, don't put yourself in that kind of a place, in that kind of a location. I found a picture here. I thought this was kind of funny. See, this is what I'm talking about. When you put yourself in a bad spot, like you have to deal with something like, that's a bad place to fall asleep. Or these ladies, you've maybe seen this picture before, but the stingrays photobombing them, that's not a good location to be in. Or even this guy, that you got way too close to the fence if that happens to you with this camel. If you struggle with envy, struggle with jealousy, anxiety, maybe even depression, studies have shown that social media is not a good place to go. It's not a good place to go. There was a study, a clinical study that was done on specifically people that would view Facebook, and it was found that through that study that the majority of people leave Facebook feeling worse than when they went onto it. The clinical psychologist said it this way: if a friend calls to say that she is engaged, promoted, or packing up to spend a month in India, it's normal to feel jealousy, a little bit of unease. But the intimacy of true friendship often mitigates those unpleasant feelings. However, with Facebook, that true intimacy isn't there, so the jealousy remains. Facebook creates pseudo-intimacy. Put you in a position that you may not want to be in, that you shouldn't be in. And in Samson's case, he kept putting himself in these positions, in these locations where he was going to have to deal with temptations that he wouldn't have otherwise had to deal with. What locations are you most tempted in? And perhaps right in front of a computer is where we find some of the greatest temptations. In Samson's life, we go on. Sometime later, when he went back to marry her, he turned aside to look at the lion's carcass. And in it, he saw a swarm of bees and some honey. And so he had actually killed a lion on a previous trip. And so he goes back down that same path, and he sees this lion, but he sees these bees there and honey. And he scoops out the honey with his hands, and he ate as he went along. And why does he do this? Well, he does it because he's hungry. But the other reason that he does this is because he's alone. And if you go back to his Nazirite vow, what you find is that he's compromising his faith. He wasn't supposed to touch a living creature who has recently died. And so by reaching into the animal's carcass and eating the honey, he's compromising his faith. He's compromising his vow. But if his parents would have been with him, I don't think he would have done it. If somebody else would have been with him that was familiar with the faith that he was supposed to live by, I don't think he would have done that. But the reason he did is because nobody else was there to hold him accountable. So what's the question for you? The question is this: what temptations do you struggle with when you are all alone? What are those things that come to you when nobody else is around to hold you accountable? There's a man named Jack I read about this past week. He worked in an organization where he had some Christian friends around him. Every day, Monday through Friday, him and a few of his friends would meet, do a devotional, pray together, and then go on about their job. He said it was really one of the better times in all of his life. But he always had a dream to be an over-the-road truck driver, drive a big rig, coast to coast. That's what he wanted to do. And one day, another friend of his called and said, "Hey, I've got this opportunity for you for this dream job of yours." Well, naturally, Jack jumped at that. He got the job, and sure enough, before long, he's driving a semi-trucker all over the country. But that was when Jack would say that temptation came to him in ways that he had never encountered before. And so he's in this truck, and he said, "I was alone for hours, thinking things that I'd never thought before. I would go to truck stops and be around people that I would never see again. Nobody ever knew each other, but we always would connect. And through the course of those conversations, we never had to worry about anybody holding anyone accountable or there ever being any follow-up because we just never would see each other again." After a couple years of doing this job, a woman called him. She shared her name, and then she said she was pregnant. It was a woman that Jack had been with recently from a truck stop that he had met. And this is how Jack would surmise his situation. "Looking back, I can see the moment I struck out on my own, Satan showed up. He climbed right up into the cab with me, put his feet on the dash, and made himself right at home. I never really knew what temptation was until I found myself all alone 1,000 miles from home." What are you tempted with when you're all alone? The devil looks for us when we're alone. 1 Peter chapter 5 says it this way, be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for groups, looking for crowds, looking for masses of people. No, that's a singular. For someone who's all alone by themselves with no accountability to devour. And he knows if he can get that person, he gets everybody else who is connected to him or to her. And perhaps there isn't a place that we're more alone nowadays than when we sit in front of a computer screen, looking on the internet, whatever it is that we may be looking at, talking to whoever it is that we may be talking to there. It's in those moments that we're isolated. It's in those moments that generally no one else is around. I came across some concerning statistics recently from this organization called Covenant Eyes. 62% of men view pornography weekly. 21% of women view pornography weekly. 56% of divorces involve a pornographic addiction. And I also saw another statistic that said if one of the members of the marriage is looking at pornography, there's a 300% likely more chance that that relationship will end up in a divorce. 94% of teens will see pornography by 14 years of age. 11 years old is the average age a child sees pornography. Inevitably, it happens. And we can mitigate it and we can hold it back. And I'm going to talk to you about some of the ways that you can do that and the ways that we do that in our home. But we have to equip our children on how to handle that when that happens. And so what I have, 13 years ago, I started this on my devices. I put Covenant Eyes on my devices. It cost me about $130 a year. You make decisions in life. And when you make a decision, you don't always know the implications or the ramifications of a decision. I can tell you that was one of the best decisions that I ever made. 13 years ago, I started that commitment, and I put it on all my devices. And I'm not above temptation, and I'm not above being tempted to look at something I shouldn't look at. I'm not at all. But because I have that stuff on my devices, that means my wife gets an email every single week of the things that I look at and the things that I see. And we've got it on all of our devices, the things that the kids look at, the things that we look at. And this has been incredible. Because it's a whole lot easier to say no when I know that she will see everything that I see. You know what I'm saying? And maybe that's something that you need to do. Maybe that's a step that you need to take. I'll tell you, if it is, it's the best $130 that you will ever spend. And if you can deal with this, you will help your faith significantly. And for Samson, though, he had no accountability. He had no parameters in his life. And so he's heading to Timnah. And he's going on, and this is what happened. Sometime later, he fell in love with another woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, see if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him so we may tie him up and subdue him. See, he had been causing them all kinds of problems. They couldn't win a battle against the Israelites because Samson was so strong, so great. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver. So Delilah said to Samson, tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued. She does this 3 times, and 3 times Samson lies to her. But on the 4th time, he finally gives in. And this is what he tells her. He says, no razor has ever been used on my head because I have been a Nazirite dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man. After putting him to sleep on her lap, she called for someone to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him. And his strength left him. Then she called, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He awoke from his sleep and thought, I'll go out as before and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. It's been said that this is one of the saddest verses in all the Bible. He did not know the Lord had left him. Let me tell you something, and hang on to this. In Genesis 15, there's a group of people. They're known as the Amorites. They were wicked, unrepentant kind of people that wanted nothing to do with God. They did whatever it is that they wanted to do. But God didn't judge them in Genesis 15. He would eventually judge them, but he didn't judge them in 15. Why is that? Because the text says their sins had not reached their full measure. Before this moment, Samson's sins had not reached its full measure. He had compromised his faith, his family. He had compromised many of the vows that he had made, but God's judgment had not come upon him until the full measure finally came upon him of sin, and he shaved off all of his hair. The Bible says, do not be deceived. And many of you in all of, our churches this morning, many of us are deceived. We think that we can keep getting away with it. We think that no one will ever find out. We think that it'll never make a difference in our life. And so we'll just keep on doing it and doing it and doing it. And all the while, these drops just keep going into this bucket. And eventually there's going to come a point where it's going to hit its full measure. And there's going to have to be some sort of a judgment that's going to take place. Is it a judgment for God to get back at you? No. God doesn't pay you back. God often disciplines us to bring us back to him. And that's what happens with Samson, as we'll see in a moment. The Bible says, do not be deceived. God will not be mocked. Are you mocking him with the way you're living your life? Are you just acting like he doesn't see what you're doing or think or know what you're thinking or hear the conversations that you're having? Are you mocking God? You will reap what you sow. And here's the deal. What I just quoted, that's not from Leviticus, where you look at somebody the wrong way and you get stoned. That's Galatians. That's New Testament. That's New Covenant. That's where you're saved by grace through faith in Jesus Christ. So don't think that just because you have a faith in Jesus that God isn't still going to bring consequences bring them about into your life. And that's true for you. That's true for me. It's true for all of us. There's grace, there's mercy, there's compassion, and God allows those things into our lives to bring us back to him, to get us back in line with him. And for Samson, this was the straw that broke the camel's back. And what happened with him is he would then, they would take him away. They would use him as entertainment. They would take him away. He'd gouge out his eyes. And it was because he was with Delilah that all this happened. And here's the question that you have to ask. Who are the people in your life that tempt you to do things you will regret? They tempt you to be angry. They tempt you to be negative. They tempt you to gossip. They tempt you. When you're around them, you were content with your house and your salary, but now you're not content with those things. They tempt you sexually. They tempt you in some other capacity with some sort of a substance or something like that. Who are these people? Who are those people in your life? When you can get rid of those people and you can get around people that are actually spurring you on to be more of who God called you to be, incredible things can happen in that moment. It's been said, you show me your friends, I'll show you your future. Man, that is so true. There was a woman years ago, Proverbs tells us this, and I'll tell you about the woman. A companion of fools suffers harm. So true. There's this woman here, her name's Jean Nittich. About 40 years ago, she had a major weight problem. She was around 220 pounds, and she wanted to lose at least 30 or 40 of that pounds, of that weight that she had. So she went and got a diet plan. She tried to apply it to her life. After a few months, she made minimal progress. And then she decided that she would get some friends around her who were also overweight. Perhaps that through each other's accountability and encouragement, they would be able to make a difference in each other's lives. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. That over the course of the same amount of time that she had applied the diet before by herself, she applied the diet with these friends of hers, and then she ended up losing the weight that she wanted to ultimately lose. And she realized there's a lot of people around us who need this. And with that, Jean Nittich would launch what's known as Weight Watchers. And through that, she would help millions and millions of people. And while so much of it is about a cookbook, it's about a diet, the heart of the program is found in the support that can be found in a group, in a community of people that are spurring one another on. Who are the people in your life that are causing you to do things that you will regret, that you will be tempted to regret? In Samson's life, he had Delilah. And it ultimately led him in a place where he's chained up to 2 columns. There's 3,000 Philistines in this building. And they had gotten to the point where they forgot. They forgot where Samson's strength came from, and his hair grew back. And in this one last moment, he cries out to God, and he says, God, just give me strength one more time that I may tear these columns down and take the life of these people who are mocking you. And in God's grace and compassion and mercy, that's exactly what happened. Their lives were lost. His life was lost. But ultimately, that wouldn't be the last story of Samson. What would get the last word in his life would be found in Hebrews 11. And what more shall I say, as the writer says? I do not have time to tell you about Gideon, Barak, about Samson. These were all commended for their faith. that even though he had compromised his life and compromised his vow, even though he had gone against, everything that he'd ever been taught and done things that he should have never done and hurt people that he should have never hurt, there was still grace, there was still compassion, there was still mercy. And we ought to have that for one another, and you got to know that God has that for you too. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 17, it says this, that if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. If you are a Christian, you are a new creation. You are regenerated and moving towards the image of Jesus. The old, the unregenerated, the unrepentant, the one that was out of line with God's will, that person's gone. There's still some of that within us because we're in this world and we're still fallen, but God is redeeming that. You don't have to lead into this old person anymore. You don't have to feed that old tendency anymore. Instead, the new has come. Feed the new. Feed the new with the locations you're in. Feed the new with the things that you look at, the things that you see, the things that you say, the people that you put yourself around. And God will do incredible things through that. Who knows what Samson's life could have been like if he hadn't lived the way that he lived? He was only one of 4 whose birth was prophesied. I've seen men who live lives of integrity, and God does incredible things through them. I've seen men and women who have lived incredibly compromised lives. They're in heaven dancing, no doubt about it. Man, there is so much they missed out on because they just chose to give in and give in and give in and give in. In 2 Timothy, there's one of my favorite verses. And I'll close with this. It talks about us being pure. It talks about us being holy there. And for those that are, God has reserved a noble purpose for them. And maybe God is just waiting for you to finally get pure, for you to finally repent, for you to finally turn into His will, to reveal that noble purpose that He has for you. Not the ignoble one, the noble one. And you're wondering, why isn't more happening in my life? Why isn't God using me in better ways, in greater ways? And He's keeping you in this place of preparation because He's waiting on you to finally turn from the old, turn into the new, live the life that He's calling you to live, and to become exposed to the great purpose and the great ways that He's wanting to use you. Samson didn't figure that out until the last moments of his life. Maybe we can all figure it out today. Let's have a word of prayer, and then we'll close out with this song. Gracious Heavenly Father, we're so grateful for the grace that you give us. Dear Lord, may we all understand that there is opportunity, that there is grace available to us, and there is a great purpose that you have for us. God, help us to put parameters in our lives and still in our hearts that we need accountability, that we need support, we need each other. And above all else, we need you. Thank you for indwelling us with your Holy Spirit to lead us down that path. We give you this all in Jesus Christ's name.